you probably would never say. And then he goes, you know, this joke comes out. No, who said it? And it was just, and it was nothing really like bombshell. It was something that could be more tabloid, more football, something like that.
Mommy, you get the joke of the day today?
Yes, we do. He's there. Yeah, he's here.
And listen.
I am. Welcome to the noon meeting of the Rotary Club of Baton Rouge. Before we start, please silence or turn your phones into airplane mode so you don't interrupt our program. The invocation will be led by Doc Suez. After the invocation, please stay standing for the pledge, which will be led by Pat Bogan. And then after the pledge, please stay standing also for the four-way test.
Please bow your heads. Dear God, we pray that you will guide our Rotary work. Grant us the wisdom to seek you in all we undertake and the energy to follow your directions. May each one of us act with love while we are honest and open in our dealings. We also pray for our members and their loved ones who are suffering due to illness in these trying pandemic times. Amen.
Amen. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please join me. Is it the truth?
Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill or better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? And now Tommy Tipo will introduce today's guests.
Thank you, thank you. Hey, we are here to welcome some of the most important people that are in this room today, our guests. And when I call your name out, would you do me a favor? Would you stand up until we have a chance to recognize you all at once? So the first one, Adam Mccarty, is a visiting Rotarian and past president of East Ascension Rotary. Good to have you here. Kevin Major, guest of Kenny Wall. Case Gonzalez, guest of Craig Stevens. Tom Cook, guest of Scott Guidry. And Tim Temple, we got to talk, man. Guest of Shelley Dupree. Let's give him a nice round of applause. Thank you.
Welcome to the club. And now Barbara Ann Eaton will introduce our newest member.
Thank you. And Sherry already texted me I have less than 1 minute. I am so happy to introduce you all to Ashley Tom. Ashley is a registered representative of the New York Life. She is a partner with her husband, Jamie A. Tom V. And for the old timers, yes, this is Dr. Tom's granddaughter-in-law. I knew you all in the back would know. Okay, Ashley grew up in Rayville. She graduated from LSU with a BA in communicative disorder. Glad I know her. She's quite the entrepreneur. She has started the Lollipop Lane Market and Blue Avenue events. She has been on the board of directors of the Junior League of Baton Rouge and of Moving Colors. She and Jamie and their children belong to First Presbyterian Church. They have 2 children, Mary Scott, who is a freshman at Alabama, and then James is a sophomore at Episcopal. So please welcome Ashley Tom. I stayed under. Do you want him?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome, Ashley. Today's head table, to my right, your left, Pat Bogan, Senior Risk Strategist, Louisiana Companies. Barbara Ann Eaton, Associate Broker, Coldwell Banker 1. Ashley Tom, our newest member. Raul Guillaume, President, GoTech Incorporated. I'm Maui Tachi, your club president. Jim Donelon, our speaker, will be more formally introduced. Kelly Bondi Troutman, Senior Vice President, Luba Casualty Insurance Company. Doc Suez, owner, Suez Real Estate, who led us in the invocation. Your head table. We have several announcements. The COVID-19 vaccination event that was going to be held today has been rescheduled. Unfortunately, Open Healthcare Clinic lost their supply of vaccines due to the hurricane, and so they're waiting for a new shipment, and when that comes in, we'll reschedule that. Next week, Wednesday, the 22nd, our guest speaker is John B. Davis, and the topic is Marijuana 101. And on September 29th, we have two guest speakers, David Fleshman and Christine Cowell from Brazil Saxby Wilson, and they will be speaking to us about signing on the dotted line, avoiding business pitfalls in NIL deals. So we should have two pretty interesting speakers in the next couple weeks. And now Ken Gonsolin with the joke of the day.
Kind of looking forward to next week's speaker, Marijuana 101. And I did read that the guy that's giving the talk is president of Good Day Farms. It's not hard to figure out how he came up with the name for that. Yeah. Oh, it's going to be a good day. In addition to being working for State Farm Insurance for the last 33 years, I've been a comedian, stand-up comedian for 30 years, and I really don't want to brag to y'all, but I'm kind of becoming a pretty well-known Cajun comedian. In fact, I had this big gig just not too long ago. They asked me to perform at the Ollie Steele Burden Nursing Home right down on Ness. That was a great show. I got up in front of everybody and I said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm happy to be here. Tell me, does anybody know who I am?" And one little old lady in the front row said, "No, but if you go ask the lady at the front desk, she'll let you know." Now, I had those people cracking up laughing. There wasn't a dry seat in the house.
Thank you, Ken. Speaker, every week the Rotary Club of Baton Rouge Foundation donates a book in the speaker's honor to Crestworth Elementary School. And today's book is Dog Diaries, Mission Impossible by James Patterson. And before we start, please remember to keep your masks on unless you're eating or drinking. And Kelly Bondi Troutman will introduce today's speaker.
Commissioner Donelon has served as the Louisiana Commissioner of Insurance for more than 15 years. He was first appointed as Insurance Commissioner in 2006 when the seat was vacated by the incumbent and has since been reelected to 4 consecutive full terms. A native of New Orleans, the Commissioner graduated from Jesuit High School, the University of New Orleans, and Loyola School of Law. He first began his career in public office in 1975 when he was elected as chairman of the Jefferson Parish Council. He then went on to serve in the Louisiana House of Representatives from 1981 to 2001, where he was chairman of the Committee on Insurance. In addition to his positions in public office, Commissioner Donelon served in the Louisiana Army National Guard for 33 years, where he retired as a colonel and received the prestigious Legion of Merit Medal. In 2013, he was elected as the president of the National Association of Insurance Commissioners and currently serves as chairman of the Surplus Lines Task Force and on the NAIC Executive Committee. On a personal note, we at Luba Workers' Comp can speak to Commissioner Donelon's dedication to the stability of the workers' comp market in our state. We've worked closely with him for many years, and he has always been honest, fair-minded, and accessible. Commissioner Donelon and his wife, Mopsy, reside in Jefferson Parish. They are the parents of 4 daughters and grandparents of 8 grandchildren. Ladies and gentlemen of Rotary, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce you to the Commissioner of Insurance of the state of Louisiana, the Honorable Jim Donelon.
Thank you very much for that kind invitation, and in particular the personal part that I've enjoyed my relationship with you and your dad before you on behalf of LUBA for several decades now, back to my days in the legislature. It's been a great relationship. And I appreciate greatly the opportunity to be here today and share a few minutes of what's going on in insurance. Needless to say, it's a hot topic. Senator Foyle and I will be visiting in the aftermath of what happens here in the next several months in the next legislative session. And from the Insurance Commissioner's point of view, that will be more challenging than what I'm doing today. No question about it. Because my job is to make insurance affordable and available and to protect consumers. And so we know how to do that. We've been doing it, I would dare say, very successfully for 15 years now, having rebuilt our property insurance market from the most devastating insured loss event in the history of insurance anywhere in the world. The record insured loss event is Hurricane Katrina. Still today, in pure dollars, we in Louisiana collected $23.3 billion for insured losses, not including flood, for Hurricane Katrina in our state. And 3 weeks later, Hurricane Rita hit the southwest corner of our state. We collected an additional $3.3 billion for insured losses. To put that in perspective, before Katrina hit us 16 years ago, our all-time worst insured loss event was a hailstorm that went through the city of New Orleans on a Sunday evening in the year 2000. And insurance companies paid for losses, most of them, to put slate roofs back to their historic condition in the French Quarter, just over $500 million. So Katrina beat that by 50 times. And then Rita came back 3 weeks later and added another $3.3 billion. 9/11, the earthquake and tsunami in Japan, nothing that has hit the insurance industry since has cost the industry as much. And we have rebuilt a property insurance market that was in free fall, and frankly, even before Katrina, was in disarray. Our residual market, Louisiana Citizens, is the state-created market of last resort. When someone can't get insurance in Grand Isle, or 1,000 policyholders in Shreveport and in another 1,000 in Monroe, too far from fire protection for the insurance companies to be willing to take on that risk, they are guaranteed by state law to have a policy written for them by Citizens, the residual market. And Citizens, at the time that I took office, was our third largest insurer. State Farm had 33% of our homeowners market, Allstate had 22%, and Citizens had 10%, was the third largest. Today, State Farm has 25%, Allstate has 11%, and Citizens is number 35 at 0.5%. And that benefits all of us, not just the folks who get private insurance coverage at a cheaper rate. The Citizens policy has to be priced every year above the competition in each zip code in the parish, and add 10% actually to the higher than the private sector in each of those zip codes. But it also benefits all of us who have insurance policies, property insurance policies, surplus lines, whatever, commercial as well as residential, when an assessment is necessary, as was necessary to pay the claims for Citizens 16 years ago. 15% was added to all of our policies in October of 2005. And that was paid by the insurers and recouped from us over the next year. But in addition to that, 1 month after I took office, I went to New York, and with Governor Blanco joining us by speakerphone, spent 3 days selling a $1 billion bond issue to finish paying those claims for Katrina that Citizens incurred. We still have 5 more years of assessment on our property insurance policies to amortize those bonds. It's my hope that I'll get to burn the last bond 5 years from now. It will be quite a momentous occasion. But thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to tell you where we are today, and a little more history to get you to where we are. Hurricanes Laura, Delta, and Zeta hit our state last year, in addition to 2 named storms that hit our state as well. I know it's a Louisiana record. I think it's an all-time record for any state to be visited by named storms. As a result of those 3 hurricanes, Laura having cost private insurers $8.6 billion through June 30th, and that'll probably be the extent of it. Delta, an additional $800 million, and Zeta, an additional $600 million, for a total of $10.1 billion in insured losses last year. That's not the end of the world, and it doesn't mean it's forever. We had a run of 8 years before Laura that were pretty much hurricane and named storm free. And as a result, the cost of homeowners insurance statewide in our state went up only 1% per year for each of those 8 years. And we attracted, today we have 136 companies writing homeowners insurance in our state. And I mentioned that the major national carriers, State Farm and Allstate, have reduced their coverage in our state, their market share, since Katrina. State Farm, not so much, 33 down to 25. Allstate in half, from 22 to 11. And the company I used to be with, Travelers, is significantly reduced, as well as other companies have. But we, more than any other coastal state, have been able to attract small regional carriers to our state to do this coastal exposure by sending off the bulk of their exposure to the international reinsurance marketplace, 2/3 of which is located offshore from our state and from the United States, in Bermuda, in Toronto, in Zurich, in London, etc. And that allows us to spread our significant coastal exposure, not just to North Louisiana, but all around the world. There isn't enough coverage in North Louisiana to effectively spread our risk at an affordable price from our coastal states. But now we face the biggest ever. AIR just yesterday upped their expected insured losses for Hurricane Laura to $25 to $30 billion. That will be the first event, if that turns out to be true, since all time. It will displace Katrina, finally, as the all-time record insured loss event. It was a Category 4 hurricane with 150-mile-an-hour winds when it made landfall in Port Fourchon, same wind speed that hit Lake Charles last year, just below the 157-mile-per-hour Category 5 hurricanes. To give you some perspective, when Katrina hit our state, it was only a Category 3 storm with 115-mile-an-hour winds and did $23.3 billion worth of damage. And by the way, those numbers, none of them include flood. For the flood event that happened with Katrina and Rita, we collected $16 billion from the National Flood Insurance Program. As to the issue with regard to mandatory or other evacuation, or in some cases no evacuation, this storm became a serious threat in a short period of time, the last 3 days before making landfall. In fact, last weekend when I was at my daughter's house, she told me that my 3 granddaughters that go to a Catholic girls' school in New Orleans actually had school on the Friday of the weekend until 3 o'clock that afternoon that Ida devastated the southeast corner of our state. My wife was in full panic mode, and she said, "We are out of here, and we're out of here tonight." I was a little less anxious to get out, and I wanted to go the next morning to a cross-country race out on the lakefront in New Orleans that my grandson was running it. And my wife said, "You can go, I'll take my car and meet you in Alabama tomorrow." And my daughter, the cross-country runner's mother, said to me afterwards, when we got to our destination, she said, "Y'all made the right call in getting out last night." We left at I left the office at 7, got home at 9. We left in New Orleans from Metairie at 11:30 and got to Gulf Shores at 1:30 the next morning. Well, I guess we left at 10:30 and got there at 1. It's a 3-hour ride at midnight. So it was late developing, and many of the public officials across the area impacted were caught unable to order a mandatory evacuation. Unable because, if you recall, we very successfully evacuated New Orleans in preparation for the landfall of Hurricane Katrina. But we had tried the year before to evacuate New Orleans when Ivan was headed toward the city of New Orleans with frightening wind speeds. Fortunately for us, it made a last-minute turn and hit the panhandle of Florida and Orange Beach and Gulf Shores and devastated that area. But that attempt at contraflow gridlocked. It did not work. And from Baton Rouge to Lafayette, people were stuck on the Atchafalaya Spillway for 8 hours in August heat and humidity. And many of them said never again. So that the next year, when they were ordered to get out of New Orleans and Katrina's path, many said, not doing it again. I'm going to stay put. And when the levees failed, they were stuck on top of 6 feet of water for 4 and 5 days in their attic or on their rooftops. 1,800 of them lost their lives. And when they took 1,000 of, well, actually they took all of the bodies to a temporary morgue at the Lamar Dixon facility in Gonzales, and the then coroner of New Orleans, Frank Mignard, did a study of 1,000 of them and reported afterwards that there was only one characteristic common in those 1,000 victims that he had studied. And it wasn't geography, it wasn't race, it wasn't income, it wasn't any of the demographic indicators that you would expect. It was age. They were all elderly. They were elderly from St. Charles Avenue, and they were elderly from the lower Ninth Ward, and everywhere in between, geographically spread throughout the metropolitan area. And when those folks shied away from evacuating because of what had happened the year before, they ended up, many of them, losing their lives as a result. That was very much in the minds of the public officials who were deciding whether to order an evacuation at the last minute on the day, 2 days before the storm made landfall, and many did not. Some did. Terrebonne Lafourche did. St. Charles did. St. John did not. Jefferson, Orleans, and St. Bernard did not, because they said, we cannot put 1 million people on the interstate and have them stuck there in the horrific event that is headed our way. So, with that facing us, and a mixed bag of some parishes having done it, others have not, I was asked by, first off, Allstate Insurance Company, in an email to me the day before the president came to town. And they asked me to ask the companies to voluntarily not require a mandatory an evacuation of any kind to trigger what I refer to as the short-term additional living expense. It's actually civil authority reimbursement of expense is the language from the policy. But for our purposes, short-term additional living expense will describe what is typically made available in a homeowner's policy when you are ordered to evacuate and get out of harm's way. And it's limited to 14 days in almost every policy, and comes with different deductibles. About a third of the policies have no deductible at all on that part of the coverage. A third have the all perils deductible of typically $1,000, and a third have the hurricane or named storm deductible applicable to that coverage as well. The president came to Laplace on Thursday of the week after, the Thursday after the hurricane, and I had been told by the governor the day before that he would be urging the companies, if not ordering the companies, to ignore the requirement or lack thereof of a evacuation order. And so he did that in Laplace, and the next day I issued a bulletin urging the companies, as Allstate had asked me a couple of days before, and the President had urged the day before, to comply with to waive the requirement of an evacuation order. A provision in the policy that is there to protect the companies from abuse. Because if every policyholder can, in their own whim, when a storm enters the Gulf, go to a hotel on the beach somewhere for 2 weeks, then that is abuse. That's not what happened in this case. The people who left, like my wife, left for fear of their lives. And that was the case all across South Louisiana. And rightly so. We now have 29 deaths that are attributable to that event, but we're frankly blessed that it's only 29. It was about the same last year in the Laura event in Lake Charles, so that we avoided the mass catastrophe that, from a human point of view, that we experienced in Katrina. When I did that ask of the industry, I knew I was putting a burden on those small regional companies that have filled the void of the exiting major insurers over the past 15 years. I knew that they were challenged to be able to do what the, quote, big boys can afford to do. Evidence, Allstate asking me to ask them to do it. What I didn't expect was the phone call I was asked to have with State Farm on Labor Day morning at 10 o'clock. I was at my daughter's house. We didn't have power. She had a generator, so I was there. And I was told by State Farm that they were not going to comply with my request. And I was asked at the press club in this room day before yesterday what was my reaction, and my reaction was truly shocked. I did not expect that. I expected the compliance. And I did say some things in response that were not well received. I had gone in my son-in-law's office and closed his door. My daughter was in the kitchen down the hall, and she said when I came out, "Well, that didn't go very well." And I said, "No, it didn't." And since then, we have been dealing with the order. Strangely, the little companies are okay now. And the reason they're okay is because by my ordering it to be done, their reinsurance, which typically for those small regional carriers, which I have my insurance on my home with one of, they reinsure themselves up to 95% of their, on average, 95% of their exposure. So that by not doing it voluntarily, but being ordered to do it, they could access and get their reinsurance coverage to pay for that exposure. So that's where we are, and we will go forward with enforcement of our order to pay that coverage. I also issued, just before that took place, Emergency Rule 47, which Senator Foyle and his colleague, Senator Abraham from Lake Charles, had given me clear authority to do, with lots of guardrails in place, oversight of the governor in that I cannot do it beyond the parishes, the area that he declares a disaster area, and I cannot do it for any longer than the period of his emergency declaration. Oversight of the legislature in that both houses have the right to conduct hearings and reject my emergency rules if they so see fit. I, in doing that legislation, offered, and they took me up on it, put in place a model, or a boilerplate, if you will, of items that I would enumerate in the event of emergencies such as we experienced recently. And we did last year when the pandemic first emerged, and we have done once or twice at other times over my 16 years as commissioner. We issued that, and basically what it does is it prevents for a temporary period of time, 30 days in the first case, cancellation or non-renewal of policies. I call it the breathing room emergency rule, just to give victims, displaced devastated victims of pandemics or things such as horrific hurricanes, time to catch their breath and get back to their business and get their premiums paid and their policies renewed. I will probably extend that 30 days, another 30 days when it expires. I'm limited to 60 under that new legislation, unless approved by the two insurance committee chairs for a third 30 days. A couple of items of interest, and then I'll open it for question. On the governor's daily call this morning on the status of the effort at recovery, the Blue Roof folks said that they're challenged in getting the demand, over 50,000 requests so far, met. They've done about 2,000 up until now, and they are on pace to be second all-time in numbers of Blue Roof requests, only second to Katrina in 2006. FEMA has, I told you about the AIR projections on losses, and I will quickly run over what I advise folks to do when asked what folks, victims of such events, should do. And my first advice, I give it every year on my tour around the state at the beginning of hurricane season, is access the National Flood Insurance Program. We benefit from it more than any other state in America. It is still significantly subsidized by the federal government. We have collected $19 billion since the program began after Hurricane Betsy flooded the lower Ninth Ward and Carolyn Park in St. Bernard in 1965, and insurers nationwide said, no more. We're out of the flood business. And the federal government stepped in and created the National Flood Insurance Program. And as I said, in pure dollars, we've collected more. The second state is Texas at $16 billion, and after that it drops down to Florida and maybe one other, New York and New Jersey, from Superstorm Sandy in the single digits. So it benefits us in a huge way. I don't have to tell you how important it was in 2016 after the floods here and in Lafayette. The average NFIP payment for insured flood damaged properties, homes in the Baton Rouge area was $95,000. The average FEMA grant for uninsured folks was $9,000. What they do to close that gap is they offer you a low interest SBA loan to pay for the repair of your damaged, uninsured damaged home. What that does to most folks is suck all of the value out of the biggest asset in the typical family's repertoire, and that is the equity in their homes. So flood insurance, we have 23% of the residences in our state insured for flood. In 2016, when the flood happened, Baton Rouge was about 12%, the Baton Rouge metropolitan area. It's at the state average of 23% now. Same numbers in the Lafayette area, 12%, now 23%. New Orleans, four-parish area, on the other hand, Orleans, Jefferson, St. Bernard, and Plaquemine are 45%. And I tell folks that's because we in that area have had 100-year floods every 5 years for the past 30 years. And we've learned from those bitter experiences the need for and the value of the National Flood Insurance Program. Our entire delegation, Democrat, Republican, for as long as I've been around, has been 100% supportive of the program. But the fiscal hawks, and typically I'm a Republican, I understand where they come from, they want that program to pay for itself. So that what they did in Biggert Waters in the last reauthorization is put it on a 5-year glide path to actuarial rates. And as Speaker Pelosi said when they passed the Affordable Care Act, when we had to pass the bill so we could read it and find out what was in it. When they read what was in Biggert Waters, it was ruinous to our state. Literally tens of thousands of properties would have been rendered worthless overnight. If they had not, happened to be the year I was president of the NAIC and was asked to come to the White House with a couple of my colleagues to talk about the waiving of the sunset of non-qualified health insurance policies, which the president was advocating we commissioners do. And I went to the meeting, and I brought a letter from GNO Inc. asking his support for the rollback of the draconian rate increases that Biggert Waters brought to tens of thousands of properties in our state. And he took it politely and said he would look at it. He had said he was opposed to the rollback, that he was supportive of the glide path over 5 years. And I was not optimistic when I left there that he would be supportive. I was really quite surprised when GNO Inc. primarily led the campaign that successfully rolled back those draconian rate increases and instead put a 18% per year cap on rate increases, compounding, not a free handout by any stretch, but very, very well received even in the most vulnerable parts of our state, those 18% per year increases in flood insurance policy rates. So that issue is up again. It's been extended a couple of times. Our two senators have bills. They're trying to lower the cap from 18% to 10, 11%, or maybe 9. But the bottom line, critical to our state, is reauthorization. With those things said, I think I have about 10 minutes left. I'd really appreciate the opportunity to answer any questions any of you might have. Yes, sir.
What's the next step at State Farm on this current deal? And if they don't cooperate, what should we be doing to Ken Johnson?
Support his next career as a joke comedian. Just kidding. He ain't going nowhere. He'll be fine. And our State Farm agents all, I went to a granddaughter's on the way home the other night. I stopped in Dutchtown and watched a granddaughter play volleyball, and sponsored by the State Farm agent, whoever he was on the board. And I truly value and appreciate that part of our insurance industry all over the state of Louisiana. Now the company, not so much. I have an issue with it. And the first thing that I'm waiting for is the challenge period to expire. I've reached out to the lawyer who had successfully defended my effort to, at the beginning of the pandemic, to impose an emergency rule that I had been doing since Governor Blanco, Governor Jindal, and Governor Edwards on a delegation of their emergency power for insurance purposes. But in both cases, both after Isaac, in whatever year that was, and at the pandemic, Isaac, I was challenged by the Louisiana Hospital Association. The one last year, the pandemic, United Healthcare challenged me. I hired this lawyer, and he successfully beat back the challenges. So I've put him on notice that I'm probably going to need him in this in this area as well. But I'm not as certain of that today as I was 2 days ago. They may be waiting for me to get complaints answers to my complaints along the lines of what I said, what they told me they were going to do in my conversation on Labor Day morning, when they said they were going to, their words were, we're going to enforce the language in our policy. And they may just wait for me to take action like I did with Allstate, frankly, in the aftermath of Katrina. They tried to circumvent a unique to our state protection for homeowners, consumers that exists nowhere else. I call it the 3-year rule. And that rule says if you've been with your homeowner's insurer for 3 or more years, you and they are married for as long as they do business, homeowners business, in the state of Louisiana. They can't change your premium, they can't change your deductible or any of your coverage on an individual basis. They have to do it on a statewide basis. Very important to us in the aftermath of Katrina. So Allstate tried 3 different ways to get around that, and the third time I slapped them down and got front page headlines. I said, guys, this is working for me. I'm making front page headlines every time you do this, and I issued my max fine of $250,000, and I said, but y'all might, what's the deal? And why are you being so aggressive in this? And I asked for a meeting and actually was accommodated with Tom Wilson, still the CEO of Allstate in Northbrook, and I brought my staff, he brought his into a meeting. Governor Blanco joined us by speakerphone, and I said, where do you want to get? You're 22% of the market now. They said 11. I said, what do you lose through attrition? Why don't you just do it through attrition? And they did, ultimately. They accelerated it by taking their name storm or hurricane deductible up to 5%. And that chased off the last that they wanted to get rid of. State Farm, frankly, copied that a year or two later, 2 or 3 years ago, and took their name storm deductible up to 5% and reduced their market share as well. So all of that to say, what I think they're going to do now is wait till I come down on them for violating my order and then react to my attempt to enforce it. Yes, sir.
For the record, State Farm is paying additional living expenses where homes are uninhabitable.
Okay.
And where mandatory evacuation orders have been issued, we are paying those claims. The contract is black and white, and State Farm's response to that is they're going to stick to the policy language. You've done a good job over the years getting a lot of homeowners and insurers to come into the market. But what sort of message or precedent is going to be set if you force an insurance company to pay for something they don't owe? How, if I'm an insurance company looking for Louisiana, what kind of message does that send?
Okay, 2 parts. And number one, thank you for the question. I really appreciate that. Are you a State Farm agent?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, and thank you for your contributions, many contributions to our state. As to their enforcing of their policy, that is partially true. They are enforcing their policy for long-term additional living expense. That's the part that uninhabitable has a relevance to. Uninhabitable has nothing to do with the short-term evacuation, 14 days of coverage, that is at issue with me. The uninhabitable, during the argument, they said just what you just said. We're going to do our policy and we're going to honor additional living expenses for uninhabitable properties. I said, how many of your claims in Lake Charles were, quote, uninhabitable? And your policy is more generous than any other one I've seen for uninhabitable premises. It's 2 years versus 1 year for every other policy, and I've looked at several of them since this came up. On the short-term additional living expense, the evacuation, if you will, their language actually changed. It no longer says mandatory evacuation. It says an order to vacate the premises by evacuation, or an order to seek shelter by evacuation. It doesn't say mandatory. Jefferson said in their pronouncements leading up to the storm, we're issuing a voluntary evacuation. What's State Farm's position on voluntary evacuations? I don't know either, and I don't think they do at this point. The point is, they couldn't, the people, their policyholders, couldn't get to a place of safety in the eyes of their public officials. This wasn't to give free vacations to the people in St. Charles and Orleans and Jefferson Parish. To your last point about attracting so many companies to our market and the recovery we've had in the past 16 years, absolutely correct. And that weighed heavily on my mind when I had to make the decision on whether this coverage should be made available or this coverage should not be made available. And probably the thing that tilted me more than anything else is that old rule when I used to practice law about the one that draws up the contract is the one who has the greater part of risk for it. And State Farm drew it up. And they drew it up for their protection, to keep from being abused by those who would take advantage of the 14 days of coverage. And I came down on the policyholders' protection side. And it may have a negative effect on our market going forward. But those small companies that have really come in and filled the void that even State Farm has created in coastal parishes, those companies are telling me, we're good, Commissioner. We got reinsurance. We appreciate the fact that you ordered us to do it rather than just asked us to do it, which for those that would have done it voluntarily, like Allstate, they'd have gotten a marketing tool to use against the competition in the future. So all of that is part of what I get the big bucks for. But I pay about 50 people in my 225 employees more than I pay me, just as an aside. Thank you very much for the questions. Yes, sir. One more?
No, we're done.
Oh,
Thank you.
I'll meet you over here.
Meeting adjourned.
Oh, really? Okay.
Here we go.
Good.
Very nice.
Thank you.
We want to hear about the insurance one today, so.
All right. I know, you're so
I used to be an inch taller, 6'5", 6'4". I have a granddaughter who took a visit to LSU for volleyball.
But the new business anyway.
16, she's 6'3". Oh, hey, Fred. How are you?
Good. I just want to.
Stepmom, that's right.
She's alive.
Tell her I said when I ran for the Senate.
Then you come to Pomeranian too.
I do. I need to come see it. Yeah.
Get you out there, man.
I think so over here.
It's coming along okay. Engineering is busy.
I don't know why, but I have this. When I was younger, it allowed me to remember phone numbers when you didn't have a contact list. I'm 76. Do tell her hello.
I'm Raul. How you doing?
I am fine. How are you?
Your nephew, Pat, used to work for me.
I remember that.
Go check him out. I said the funeral. I saw